Well, welcome everybody. I'm very pleased to host today's seminar, and thank you very much for giving up your time this afternoon to attend. As Dan has just been saying, we have approximately about 100 people joining us, maybe even more, and we hope this afternoon works for you. A little bit of housekeeping. We'll keep people mute, and we won't be showing videos during the presentation, certainly from our keynote speaker and also our panelists. But we have a question and answer facility on Zoom, so please feel free to use it, and that would be good for any of our panelists and speakers to pick up on that as they go through. Any questions left unanswered, we'll then wrap up and address in our a questions and answer forum, which should also introduce the fact that if you want to raise hands and various other things on Zoom, then we'll try and pick up that and cut to you. Our keynote speaker has got a presentation, which we will be, I think we're okay to share after the event. And also, just to let people know, we will be recording throughout, and we'll be putting this up on YouTube at the end of the event. So you can tweet it, promote it, run it through again, enjoy the moment to your heart's content. So I've just, I will start by introducing our keynote speaker, really. If you haven't read Mike Berners-Lee's How Bad a Banana's the Carbon Footprint of Everything, I would suggest you do. It's a fantastic read. And our keynote speaker also thinks that it is a wonderful read. Rosalind is a mayoral candidate for the 2021 election. Fascinating website around net carbon 2025, which I think is a pretty tough target, but you're currently living the net carbon zero lifestyle of 1 ton of carbon per year, Rosalind. So we'd all like to know more. Over to you.
Hello everybody, it's great to be here and to share, well actually my year finished August 31st. Still living a very low carbon lifestyle, just because I guess I got used to it. So I'd really like to share a presentation to kind of give you an idea, you know, why I did this project, and you know what I learned and what I can share with you. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Okay. Right, I think we're ready to go. So yes, I mean, I like to sort of talk about, you know, why I sort of created this project really out of nothing, in a sense, because there were a lot of things on my mind. I was going to a lot of meetings and people were coming up with the phrase net carbon zero, and you know, a lot of their visions, a lot of sort of brave new world, sort of high tech sci-fi type thing, and I kept on thinking, you know, I just don't think it's going to be like that. So I wanted to try it out for myself, and if my gut instinct was right, and set up the project, and I'll give you an idea of what it was. And I came to the idea of 1 ton, which I'll explain later is sort of ballpark net carbon zero, and I'll explain why that is. The context of me starting this project was really, well, it was this report in October 2018, which I think the IPCC report sent shockwaves, not really through the climate community. I mean, even people who are very well versed in climate issues. And the Paris Agreement was really looking at under 2 degrees centigrade. But this particular IPCC report said no. You know, this is not going to work. We really need to be keeping on to 1.5 degrees rather than 2 degrees. Really, they were saying every bit of warming matters, every year matters, every choice matters. We're running out of time. We've got to get this sorted. And, you know, really, I think it was a wake-up call to the world. I was also, at a very similar time, October 2018, I was at the first Extinction Rebellion action in Parliament Square, where Greta Thunberg also spoke. And that was really also people coming together, really, you know, a lot of information that, yeah, we were running out of time and things were moving much quicker than people had anticipated, and this was time to really, really focus. So I have been involved with, you know, the first youth climate strike in Parliament Square in early 2019, and quite a few of the Extinction Rebellion actions. So the Paris Agreement 2060, IPCC's special report, net carbon zero by 2050, and the UK climate change. So the government has aligned themselves with the 2050 date, but Youth Climate Strike want 2030 and Extinction Rebellion 2025. So that gives you an idea that things, you know, like the dates are coming down, and we're not just, you know, we're talking about also political as well, political movements on this. So if it's Labour, New Green Deal, they're looking at 2032. This really fascinating report that was related to the 1.5C IPCC report came out, and this was much more human. You know, a lot of what I see in campaigning is very top down. You know, there's massive budgets. It's really difficult to get a feel, and it doesn't feel very bite-sized. It doesn't feel like you as a human being and as a community can really get hold of what this is. So this report really shows you where we need to be if we're going to get to net carbon zero by 2050. And so there's 2.5 tonnes by 2030, 1.4 tonnes by 2040, and 0.7 tonnes by 2050. Now, 0.7 tonnes is the net carbon zero. Now you might be thinking, what, you know, you said 1 tonne. Well, I kind of rounded it up, and you'll see that my project is pretty much about ballpark. It's not a kind of scientific project. It's more, let's get a feel of what this is like. And I'll also explain that I knew when I was starting this project that a lot of things like the electric grid is still only 50% clean energy. A lot of things are not quite in the moment. And so I've given a little bit of room for maneuver on that as well. But yeah, I also wanted to point out, so this report says, changes in lifestyles are not only inevitable, but would need to be radical and start immediately. Now, I think that word inevitable is quite useful because it sort of picks up on what Greta Thunberg says, which is change is coming whether you like it or not. And in a sense, the sooner we start to prepare for this, the better it's going to be for us. So, so I think it's quite important to think that really. You know, it's coming anyway. So let's make it the best it can be. I wanted to also point out that what I was doing was lifestyle carbon budgets. So these are individual carbon budgets. So, you know, those are per year for an individual. Rather than, as I pointed out here, this isn't to do with government consumption, and this isn't to do with capital formation. They're counted separately. But it's really important to recognise that 72% of global emissions are related to households. Now, that kind of surprised me, and it might surprise you, because we hear a lot about government and you know, business, but we very rarely hear about households. Now, I've tried to pin down the UK figure. It's been really difficult. It's between 60 and 81%, which is quite annoying that I haven't pinned that down. Somebody said from memory, they think it's 75%, somebody who works for the Climate Change Committee. I know that Finland, they're much more precise. It's 66% of their emissions are related to households. So we kind of get a feel of it, at any rate. So when we talk about net carbon zero, you'll hear different things about that. So I'm very much, this project is focused, the 0.7 or the 1 ton, however you look at it, is really focused on what I would call net carbon zero. And since you're living in a beautiful part of the world, you may be interested that this is nature's gift to us. Nature's gift is that it can sequester or remove a certain amount of carbon from the atmosphere. So if 0.71 tons, sorry, my internet's not great. Can you hear me? Then if we look after our ecosystems, so we restore our ecosystems and we look after and protect our natural world ecosystems, that gives us the best chance of having a carbon budget that we can live well on, and can, in a sense, provide us with this net carbon zero rather than zero. We don't want to go to zero. We want to be able to emit a certain amount of carbon that the natural world can sequester. Now, I just want to make, this is such a big subject, I'm only going to make a few points. So there's our gardens, there's our community spaces and our common areas, there's our farming, there's our, our natural ecosystems, and all of these we can play a part in, either politically or in our own gardens, making space for nature. Not using chemicals, not using, pesticides and weed killers, which literally will kill the life in the soil. It's all about life, as much diversity as we can in our soil, which will then remove that carbon. And also in terms of farming, any animal or plant-based farming that is using a lot of chemicals, pesticides, will basically kill the soil, and it will be unable to remove that carbon. So it's extremely important. I suppose it's an obvious, but the more we care for our ecosystems and our natural world, wherever we are, the more this nature's gift is available to us, and the more we destroy it, the more our carbon budgets are going to be reduced significantly. So the other thing that people talk about zero is sort of man-made technologies, and I come out with this slightly sort of Simpson-like picture. So the idea is that you create these technologies and you can carry on sort of flying and burning fuel and driving as much as you want and fly, whatever. And it will all just be taken out of the atmosphere, and we don't need to worry. But I mean, this report is quite clear. These technologies do not exist at any scale that's useful for us, and there's no reliability to this that they will be able to do so. So it's a risky societal decision. The numbers, the carbon budgets per person, you can see from this they're bigger. So when you get down to net carbon zero, you've got 1.5 rather than 0.7. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of the never never. It's believing in the never never slightly. The other thing that is really important, and I don't think it's talked about enough, is your entire individual lifetime budget is tons of carbon. Now, that's sort of a piece of information that can be a bit daunting, because obviously you invest a bit. So I've sort of put these two together. So what is the current play in numbers? This is kind of like the number crunch slide where you kind of see what you have to invest in and what you do currently, and you look at what you have to fit it all into. And it is, you can see why it's getting really tight to stay in 1.5C. You know, some people will go on a flight, a business flight, from London to Hong Kong and use up 10 tons of that. Even an economy flight will be about I think an average flight will be about 4.5 tons. EU systems about 9 tons. I mean, you know, it's between 9, 10, 11 tons. Whereas other people, other global systems are living on Zimbabwe on 1.6 tons, but some people are living on as low as 0.2 tons, I think, in Burundi. So you can see that, and the other thing is a new car is quite a large range. It will produce 8 to 50 tons of carbon just in manufacture. Now, I know some people don't know about embedded carbon, but I'll just give a quick explanation of that. Embedded carbon is whatever carbon is used in the production of an item. And it's quite a complicated thing, and Mike Berners-Lee goes into it, and that's what he does, he researches this. But a new car is between 8, the smallest cars, 15 to a Range Rover SUV, that sort of thing. So you can see that that completely uses up your entire carbon budget if you buy a Range Rover. The other thing that I just wanted to put in context is that the richest global 10% account for over half the emissions, and the richest 1% for 15% of the emissions. Now, this might surprise you, and actually surprised me, that you only have to be earning over £27,000 to be in the richest global wealth. So that also puts things a bit in perspective, because I think most people don't see themselves in that top 10%. Actually, you know, a lot of people are. And the second graph that I'm showing you, so that's this graph here. I think there, sorry, there. And then this one is really showing more the sort of equity and the climate justice issue. So somebody in Burundi is in the central zone of this donut. It's called the Cape Ray West donut. Now, these people in Burundi are living below a sustainable level. And so we want them to have more so that they can get up to a sustainable level. Whereas somebody who is in the top 10 to 1% is living beyond planetary boundaries. And, you know, that is a lot of us, really. The other thing that I'll quickly say, because I don't want to run out of my time to speak about the project, but I just want to say that this is the ticking carbon clock in New York. I don't know what it is today, but if we carry on at carbon emission rates, we will hit 0.5C in just over 7 years. Now that's why people like Extinction Rebellion and Youth Climate Strike that 2050 is not quick enough. Yeah, that kind of puts it a bit in perspective. So here is my project. I called it a rapid imperfect prototype because I knew it was going to be pretty imperfect. I had to use what I had to hand, which is Mike Berners-Lee book from 2010, which was getting a little bit old, but you know, that's, and any I could source from the internet, and I knew it wasn't going to be scientifically, you know, it wasn't scientific, but it was kind of applied science, and you know, it was really trialing or sort of improvising in a sense. So I worked out that So I wanted to start in September, 1st of September 2019, because I thought it would be harvest time. I thought there'd be lots of lovely, seasonal food, local seasonal food. So I started 1st of September 2019 and finished 31st of August this year. My daily budget was 2.774 kilograms per day, which is 2,700, give or take, grams. So I also wanted to do a journal because I thought, I'm not just doing this for myself, I really want to share this information with people. And so I decided that I would do a journal of every day I would write down what I consumed and sort of do a guesstimate. So it include food, drink, transport, entertainment, shopping, data, showers, washing up, heating, a few other things, along the way. But I wanted to do quite a, I wanted to cover as much as I thought I could. So I started out with a 10 version of How Bad Are Bananas by Mike Berners-Lee. And sort of interestingly, I finished on August the 31st, and then 3 days later, he published his latest version, which did sort of put calculations into sharp relief. So I did get some things wrong, which I'll kind of show you. But I just want to read what he says, because I think his way with words is really good, and he kind of encapsulates what this is about. So if we're serious about addressing climate change, we need to become and carbon literate and get to grips with the implications not only of our choices, but also the bigger infrastructure which underpin the things we do. So he is really drawing together a lot of things in that statement. And I think that this idea of being carbon literate, it's quite a new thing for us. And I think it is something that hasn't really been discussed because it is quite a complex subject. Now, there is some differences between the two books, and I can't go into it because it's a bit too complicated. Most things have gone down, but there are a few things that have gone up, and I will mention a few of them. Now, I kind of, last time I gave a talk, quite a long time ago on this, I missed out the slide, and I realised afterwards that this was one of the most important slides. And I have made this list of what are the low carbon options and the carbon freebies. So what can you do, and you're not going to use any of your budget, pretty much. And this is just a very short list because I think this is very expansive, and I think this is something a think tank or a community or I'm sure I think there's loads of things, but I think this is the kind of way we should be thinking. We should be thinking, how can we make our communities, our world that can really make space and time for these, because these things are going to I don't know if you can hear me. These things are going to provide quality of life without eating into our budget. And I think there's more things. I think I didn't put sports and sports and things like that. So I think there's a lot more than this list. But I'll just point out, I mean, obviously the cycling, I did a lot more cycling. I did a lot, and I grew my own food and gardened a lot, as we all did on lockdown. Or a lot of us did anyway. And cooking from fresh. I wanted to point out just the idling thing, because I think, although that's controversial, this is kind of, this is where we get into sort of a slight cultural metamorphosis, because a lot of what, hardworking families, working night day, it's very much part of our culture is a very hardworking work ethic. Now, sometimes that's really good and that's really appropriate. But sometimes a lot of our busyness and our work and our desire to do things to the max does not take into the ability to just be quiet, to just process things. and that is it is an extremely low carbon thing to do, but actually quite a useful thing to do, and something I don't think we do a lot of at the moment. So I'm just pointing it out because I think that's an interesting point of conversation. But I won't dwell on this because I think that's something that I'm sure people could add to and think about themselves. Now, a few shocks. I had a few shocks on this. So the mobile-to-mobile phone call. Now, this is in Mike Benner's the first book was 57 grams per minute on the network, and that kind of, just the 30-40 minute call kind of used up my entire budget for the day. So yeah, that was a bit of a shock. The other shock, slightly, this is where there's some real improvements being made, but in his earliest book, his 2010 book, he had public transport at 150 grams. Now that was, even for quite short trips, that was problematic for me. But in the new book, it's come down to 80 grams per mile, pretty much for trains, and we even have the possibility of going down to the French 22 grams per mile for some of their rail transport a little bit later. The first hour of gas heating used up my entire carbon budget. That was difficult. I got my plumber to come round, and he turned down the output and the flow of my efficient gas boiler, and it did half the first hour. So that did make some difference, and I think that's quite useful. But yeah, no, gas heating's not doable on that carbon zero. So we found that out. Streaming video, on the kind of budgets people are on at the moment, that wouldn't seem to be a problem. But I did have to be a bit mindful of that, because if you want to do a binge sort of video streaming, you're gonna go through your carbon budget pretty quickly. Now I'm just going to point out the egg, because this is one of the things that's gone up. They weren't gone up, but an egg has gone up. Now the reason is because we are cutting down forests, places like the Amazon, soya. Then we're transporting it to the UK to feed our chickens to make eggs. Now all of those things are detrimental, and I'm sure we can produce eggs that don't have to be so environmentally destructive, and we can produce our own feed for eggs. So I think that's quite important. The latte, I tried the oat milk. I really thought I was doing well on the oat milk. Still quite a lot. Yeah, lattes plus a disposable cup, and obviously not good. Email, just to be careful about the attachments. Yeah, I had a pizza and a beer out with a friend, and I thought, it's vegetarian, but a vegan is about 1 kilogram. But yeah, the pizza for I think it's just the oven and everything. The cheese, you can do cheese, but you have to. Oh, sorry. Okay, we're going on to the next one because I'm not sure how to go back. So now this is kind of my journal. This is a kind of page of my journal, and this is me about 5 years ago cycling in London. So I did a lot of that, and that was great, and that comes up there. So cycle 4 miles, 12 grams. That's nothing. If I'd done that by car, that would have been about, just for the 4 miles, about 2 kilograms. So most of my daily carbon budget. That's for an average car. Yeah, so it just gives you a feel. I mean, this is a summer, so I'm not having to heat my home. So, there's a couple of, I don't always have a couple of glasses of maybe, oh, I don't know, maybe this one isn't a couple of glasses of wine, anyway. But yeah, oh no, it is, yeah. So you know, I'm enjoying life. I'm having good food. I'm cycling around, and I'm going online and what have you. So I'm doing pretty much what most people do. Now, I did it for a year. Why did I do it for a year? I did it for a year because the seasons are going to be very different. They're going to be very different challenges. So autumn was great, lots of lovely seasonal local food. You know, I have a local farmers market. I really enjoyed it. You know, and then and the heating issue, but also I realised that in winter you just need more food. You need more food. You need kind of, you know, good quality food and a broader diet. And I was finding it, yeah, maybe a little bit more difficult. Spring, yeah, obviously we went on lockdown, so you know, this was not, obviously I didn't plan any of this, so it was quite interesting. My neighbours around me, and obviously most people in the UK were living, you know, pretty low carbon lifestyles compared, you know, not you know, kind of unwittingly. So it was quite interesting in the spring. A lot of people were planting seeds and growing their own, and really getting into quite sustainable, you know, very low carbon activities in a way. And then the other thing was summer, because I did start to feel like I wanted to go away, and I did have to go away for kind of personal reasons. But the long distance travel is something, I mean, I still do worry a bit about public transport. You need to get public transport down, because if you travel 50 miles, I know travel 50 miles from London to Rye and back, that's 100 miles. That tops up on the public transport. It's really got to get down to kind of like 30 grams or 22 grams that the French system has, and then I think we'll be all right. But I'll go into a few more of these, the problem areas. We need to rapidly decarbonise 27 million UK homes. This is the biggest infrastructure project ever undertaken on UK soil. Anybody that tells you there are no jobs, there are jobs. This is the most enormous project, and it needs to be customised to different homes. Somebody's told me in the business there's about 10 different archetypes of buildings, but it's still quite a complex thing. We need to decarbonise our electric grid. We need to put solar, I believe, on every viable roof. There's also quite interesting small hydro, and then there's obviously the heating systems, the heat pumps, and there's quite an interesting thing that Dan sort of shared with me about the possibility maybe of a heat battery which can replace a boiler, but that's maybe not available until next year, and I'm not sure how that's going. But yes, I mean, this is a very important. Having done this myself, I do not want people to be cold in a net carbon zero world. I want everybody to be able to have heating, hot water, be able to wash up, because washing up was quite high carbon as well. So this is incredibly important, and this is where we get into politics and how politics can support this very rapid trajectory. I've got a fun challenge there, which is just kind of thinking about your own home and you know, looking at your different devices, and oops, am I all right? And so if anybody wants to take into it now, for time reasons, yeah, people might want to have a look at that. Quickly want to go into the transport options, just because I think they're really very important. And I've even put, yeah, so this is really showing you that walking and cycling will need to be your main way of traveling around. These are the really low carbon ways of traveling around. Electric bike also is low carbon and gives you the ability to move much further. So we really need to be building, you know, walking and cycling networks, I would say, in every town, village and city. This should be your local trips under 5 miles, should really be by cycling and walking, backed up by public transport, possibly cycling taxis for people who, you know, that's more difficult. At the moment, our underground's down to 68 grams. Obviously not now, but when it's at full capacity, you know, when there are a lot of people on there. Average London bus journey, if also it's reasonably full. But if you're looking at this electric bus, you know, as long as it's completely full, it's 6 grams per mile. Now, that's for a 90-seaters. I mean, that in terms of a long distance holiday, I mean, that's very doable. It was a good investment. I mean, obviously difficult at the moment, COVID, but our rail is still 80 grams per mile, and that really needs to be improved. Average car journey, 530 grams per mile. That is problematic on 2.7 kilometers per day. If it's rush hour and congested, it goes up to 2.2 kilograms per mile, which is obviously not going to get you very far on your daily budget. Electric car comes down to 180 grams per mile, which is better, but you know, you couldn't go far on that. The average electric car to buy is about 11 tons. That's actually wrong. So new SUV is about 50 tons. I don't know anyway about that. Now, so I'm coming up. This is holiday time, and this is what I think are the options. So there's the rail. That's, you know, if it goes down low enough. There's the electric bike camping. I think that would be, if you provide the right safe infrastructure, I think that could be really fun and enjoyable way of going on holiday. Now, I'm also involved in the Sail Cargo Alliance, and they are really promoting passenger sail ships across the Atlantic and also to Europe. And I do believe that this will be a major growth area. And for people who like adventure, I think this offers a real solution. And then we have this 90-seater electric bus, which I think is also good. So I'm just going, because there's often a slightly bizarre kind of, I don't know, argument, you know, should it be system change or individual change? Mike Berners-Lee in his new book comes up with this interesting graph, which basically says the two are completely interrelated, which is what I feel is. So, yeah, I just wanted to show that the two are interrelated, and this is why all campaigner, activist, artists, politicians, citizen, I believe that my carbon footprint, so cut my carbon, and my carbon handprint, which is the push for change. So that's, you know, is, you know, makes total sense when you realize social change is the foundation of individual practice. And the knowledge you build up by doing that, becoming carbon literate, really helps in the politics and the activism as well. So I think this is a really important question that people want to know. What can I do? And I have heard some climate scientists ask this, and one said, darn your socks. And I thought, no, come on. We need to have, you know, we need to be much more helpful with people. So I'm going to suggest, if some people would like to do this, try living on net carbon zero budget for just a day. If you have the Mike Berners-Lee new book, That will give you an idea, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It can just be kind of just get a feel for what your life is, your lifestyle is, and to get a little bit of carbon literacy into your personal lifestyle. And then think about maybe what are the difficult areas? What are the areas of your life that really it's quite difficult to imagine how you're going to, make that pathway down to net carbon zero. And then how can you then prepare in your homes, communities and schools, part of bringing it into your community as well as your homes. And then if you begin to have a much deeper understanding, you can then contact your councillors and your MPs and really, back up your arguments with facts and figures. And I think one of the most important things we can all do, and sometimes it can be a little bit difficult around the Christmas dinner table, who knows if we're going to do that, but to really discuss and share knowledge and really just open up a conversation with your family and friends and your work and community schools, colleges, whatever. Because we do need to discuss this. This is probably the biggest metamorphosis, and I call it a metamorphosis or a civilizational adjustment, change, whatever you're going to call it. This is unprecedented, and it really needs us all to support each other in doing this, because it's without this, it kind of underpins everything. And finally, my sources, and I hope I haven't gone over time too much. It's a complex subject, so I tried to keep it down, but yeah, I hope I explained and helped you understand at least a little bit of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosalind. That is absolutely amazing. Fantastic. Gosh, so many things to come out of there. You will share your slides with us, won't you, Rosalind? So we can can all try and mimic your day there on a 1 ton lifestyle. I'm looking forward to that. I was thinking I might see if I can persuade my wife to try it first and see how she gets on. Simon, are you going to look at the questions, or would you like me to should we do the panel discussion?
Dan, no, what I'm going to do is I was equally intrigued. Thank you very much, Rosalind. Fantastic presentation. I've got to admit I was getting a bit depressed until you put in the 2 glasses of wine and also said that actually it's about enjoying yourself at the same time. So very good. I think the other 2 things I thought there was a very, very powerful slide about what you could do, what individuals could do, and I really enjoy the idea of idling and foraging. I thought there were 2. I'd like to hear more about that. And then I would just pick up on your last point around contacting county and government councillors, etc., because that leads us into our next panelist and presentation. Councillor Steve Broadbent is chairman of the Buckinghamshire Council Climate Change Select Committee. In July 2020, the new Buckinghamshire Council confirmed its full commitment to tackling climate change and has set a challenging but deliverable target date to achieve net carbon zero for Buckinghamshire as a whole by 2050. Now, you might say, in what you've heard so far, is that quite so challenging? In line with government's ambitions for the country. It will also target to deliver a net zero carbon for the council's own activities much earlier, potentially as early as 2030. Steve, take it away. Tell us a bit about what you and Buckinghamshire Council are doing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Simon, and good afternoon, everyone. Actually, I'll come to that in a minute, but I was quite struck by Rosalind's use of the phrase being much more human, because my opening comments before we get to the policy side was to think about the people side and how that affects change. Because a pupil written blog at my son's secondary school this week, they still managed to publish a blog, short blog, that just was entitled "The Other Global Crisis." the environment. And clearly this conference, and even though we're in the horrific situation of COVID, is a bit of a stark reminder that we're still in people's consciousness in terms of what action needs to be taken on the environment. And my first point really is the digital one. I'm only able to be here with you today because of the internet and the connectivity. And I'm always mindful to those that are marginalized. A year ago in my village, the internet wouldn't have coped with this. And if we were to move to a net zero carbon point of view, and the last slides Rosalind put up with the carbon footprint and handprint, kind of needs everyone to be connected, even if, you know, there may be some carbon embedded in achieving that in the first place. But then if you think about it, we've got an increased dynamism in our society in this area and in markets in this area. But if you're not connected, you can't access the new energy, the disruptor energy suppliers who are providing 100% renewable as their energy, for example, because you're marginalized out of it. So in the first instance, about how do we make sure we don't leave people behind as everything continues to move forward. And as those demand patterns change, and COVID has certainly forced that, the increase in working from home, and it's accelerated the change of our use of town centres and what we do with our centres and where, you know, ultimately where people wish to live and work and how they travel. It really exposes that the two key drivers of carbon for households, as was mentioned earlier, but the two key drivers of heating and transport are vital. And transport through the England economic heartland area that we sit in accounts for almost half of all the emissions. And therefore, we just need to think about if we connect the two. So the connectivity point and the transport point and the changes in demand. For example, we could embrace on-demand green transport routes. There was a slide a minute ago and commentary in the chat to say, you know, public transport, the numbers would improve if people use them more. Well, that doesn't need to necessarily be set routes at set times. So we need to take those shifts in terms of the access we give to people digitally in their transport and so on. And I echo the comments made earlier about local journeys and first and last mile work, and undoubtedly making those connections and taking away barriers that make people go down the line of least resistance has got to be the way forward. So with that, I think today we're at an important point in history because we have finally public consciousness is far greater in wider society than it has been before. And whilst the statistics I'm about to give you may not be statistically comparable in a strict academic sense, two recent surveys I think illustrate that. In 2019, a UK survey done by the government suggested 85% of people wrote they were concerned, and only 52% of that 85 said very concerned, whereas the most recent survey we did locally in Buckinghamshire, that number is now 95% of people in our county, or at least those who responded, saying they're concerned, and 79% of those being very concerned. Therefore, attitudes are shifting, and attitudes are vital in this area. You know, there is a role to play for sure in authorities here. Regulations can accomplish goals clearly through either a fear of sanctions or a desire for a reward. But the byproduct of that is to influence these attitudes. I mean, think, for example, a silly example maybe, but the plastic bags in supermarkets. I don't think it was the 5p or 20p that you paid for there. I think it was an attitude shift. And attitudes then lead in, if you like, and I don't like using the word, but in behavioral economics, they talk about the morality. So suddenly making these choices that Rosalind was talking about, every choice matters. Suddenly, if you can connect that choice to where you are in society and how that attitude fits, then I think we go a long way down it. Some people will be familiar, for example, with nudge theory. But I think what we have to do is make sure that the nudge doesn't become a shove, because, you know, the research suggests that then gives you back a negative, and we don't want to lose the groundswell of the shift towards having people become carbon literate, as Rosalind was talking about. So why does it matter? Well, Simon asked me to talk about the council, and he's right. I chair I'm not creating the policy per se, because I'm not in the executive. I have a cross-party role as chair of it's actually the Transport, Environment and Climate Change Committee. So you can imagine 3 really chunky subjects there within the work of one. And I chair that. So it's the key scrutiny function of the council, of the executive of the council. As I say, it's cross-party, public meetings where we have public questions as well, and we hold them to account. And a tremendous amount of work is being undertaken by the council currently in terms of creating and producing the climate change strategy. A baseline carbon audit has just been published, and that's available on the council website. And in fact, our next meeting is next Thursday, and an update on progress for the creation of the strategy will come. But the key point is the scrutiny function is vital there. So here we're operating proactively rather than reactively, rather than allowing just a silo of one cabinet member or a few people to create the strategy, reflecting the views of public members of the public and a wider group of councillors to create that is really, really important. So we are working proactively to challenge and try and positively influence the outcome of that strategy. And it's actually really fast moving, with the theory that by February that would be produced. The big news today, when Rosalind just said, what can you do? You can contact councillors and MPs and so on as part of a range of actions. Another action is there is a public consultation exercise for the county's carbon climate change strategy. That will run November through to December, and we'll be asking groups, parish councils, through the local media to promote that. So actually you can have a voice straight into that process. And it brings me finally then to the point I want to make, where policy and people come together. And I suppose the simple word, I was trying to think, what is it? And it has to be trust. And I think policies, attitudes, campaigning groups, community groups, regulations and people, we all have a vital part to play, but we have to be able to trust one another. And I think that if people can, I think it really reflects that Venn diagram that Rosalind just showed. If the push for change, if you know that action, serious action is being taken and consideration made by institutions and authorities, and you can match that to the action you can take yourself, including with a little bit of the push, then I think trust will build, and the momentum would carry on. There is a lot happening, and maybe people, there's another survey in there to show, or data in there to show that people are very aware of the physical points that have been changed by the council. For example, if they see a new electrical vehicle charging point in a car park, people see that. But I think it's time for that policy piece to follow through. We have innovative kinetic energy capture trial going on in Aylesbury, for example, along a road that forms part of a series of living laboratory works. There's improved, green credential vehicles collecting our waste. There's solar panels on some rooftops, but of course we can do much, much more. But I don't think, what I'm saying is we're not coming from a standing start. So there's going to be a public consultation exercise. The policy is in development, and clearly it needs to be credible and flexible. And I agree with Rosalind on the point of new technologies. There is lots of new technology that has already dropped the costs of and the opportunities we have from making change. But I think we need to have a plan that gets us, even if you disagree with the timescale, but at least has a credible plan that works as quickly as possible, as early as possible, but gets us through to 2050. And then if technology gives us greater advantages to accelerate and take some leapfrog moments within that, then of course we'll take that as a benefit rather than as the savior. So the time is now. I think there's a revolutionary change needs to harness the power of motivated groups and early adopters, if you like. And I think the people on this call today would fall into that category. So it's clear from, I think, what I'm saying and what Rosalind said, it's going to need a joint effort, but things are moving. And perhaps, I just finished, the philosopher and MP Edmund Burke, who's buried in Beaconsfield, and he died in 1797. But he said then, society is a contract. It's a partnership not only between those who are living, but between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are yet to be born. And I think if we remember that, that's a good guidebook for why we need to take the action we do and where we move to.
Steve, thank you very, very much for that. That was excellent. The things I picked up, certainly what you said at the beginning about marginalised out of it, and there's certainly something about equality and whether all people have the ability to work on these things and not to their detriment. Edmund Burke, a local chap, I couldn't have said it any better, I think. So thank you very much. I'm just going to change the order of presentation, if I may, because I know Ed's got a prior engagement at just after 3. So Ed, I've just introduced you. Scientists Warning Europe. It's just a bit of research. Clearly, some of this was based on 1700 scientists back in 1992, reflecting on where the world was going at that moment in time. And then almost 25 years later, realizing that they still hadn't made much progress. And clearly, your group harks back to some of that stuff. Tell us a bit about your group. Tell us a bit about your thoughts, Ed.
Great, thank you very much, Simon. So great to be with everybody today. Love to tell you a bit about me, what I'm doing and my thoughts. Just start though by correcting Steve. There is no technology that's going to get the carbon out of the atmosphere in order to save us by 2030 or 2050, and no scientists think that is possible. So let's stop saying it now and let's never say it again. If those technologies actually become available, then we can talk about it. We're running currently with Scientists Warning Europe 28 talks that are running throughout this week, covering 6 stressors, which include nature, energy, sustainable economy, short-lived pollutants, food and nature. And within that, we've had some of the top scientists in the world talking. There'll be another talk today. 2 are happening at the moment. That's why I'll dip out in a minute to introduce one of those. Another talk's happening at 5 o'clock, and we have 4 tomorrow. Within that, we've gone through some of the technologies for taking carbon out of the atmosphere. None of them are ready. None of them are ready at scale, and none of them do we have the resources in which to build them. And when we build them, they use up carbon as well, and we have a secondary problem from that carbon, that residual carbon. So I'm Ed Gemmell. I'm the Managing Director of Scientists Warning Europe. I also founded World No Disposable Cup Day and Believers Action on Climate Change. And in my pre-ecological background, and that's not so long ago, I was an ex-city lawyer, ex-army officer, and then running my own marketing company. I went through my own ecological conversion literally in June last year. Why did that happen? Well, partly through Greta Thunberg, the Pope, David Attenborough, and a general feeling of unease. And then I came across the Scientists' Warnings. Now, the 3 Scientists' Warnings to humanity, as Simon said, in 1992, they wrote and told us we were on a collision course with the biosphere. And that was signed by 1,700 scientists at the time, and they included more than half the Nobel Prize winners. And that's just about pre-email being universal. 2017, the World Scientists' Warning to Humanity, a second notice came out. That has been signed and endorsed by over 20,000 scientists. And it basically said that what the original group said was absolutely right, just we've done absolutely nothing, and the situation is worse and even quicker than they anticipated. On the 5th of November last year, as President Trump tried to pull America out of the Paris Accord, which we all hope will be reversed in a short time, the world scientists issued the World Scientists' Warning of a Climate Emergency, now signed by over 15,000 scientists. The science is totally over. We know we've got a massive problem and we have to act quickly. 2050 is woefully too late. Rosalind realised this with what she's doing on the individual basis, and we all have to go with that. But we've got to do the heavy lifting within society as well. And that includes all levels of government and all leaders at every level in business and in anything else. Now, I stood in the general election in Wickham against Steve Baker, who may have been at one point seen as a climate denier. And Steve was gracious enough when he won the election to open up his speech to the cameras and say, thank you, I'm pleased I won the election. We are all now environmentalists. And that is what we've got to be, and we have got to work fast. The UN has given us 10 years to limit our global warming to 1.5 degrees. Rosalind said that. And that means reducing carbon emissions by 7.6% a year starting last year, not this year. If we wait until 2025, it's 15.4% a year. That's massive. Carbon budgets. Rosalind talked about individual carbon budgets. A study was done last year by the University of Surrey on the carbon budget for the world. The carbon budget for the world to stay under 1.5 degrees is 420 gigatons. Okay, that won't mean terribly much to everybody, but 420 million tons of CO2. Now, within the way we're burning our carbon at the moment, and carbon emissions are going up by about 1.2% a year up until COVID, but in the way we're burning our carbon emissions at the moment, the UK's carbon budget, so based on the amount we use per person in the UK, and our section of that carbon budget finishes in 2024. Lights off. Keep living like you are until 2024. And if you don't want to then be responsible for destroying the rest of the planet and destroying your children's future, turn the lights off. For the whole of the planet, it's 2028. So we need to get serious about the action now. What Rosalind's doing is almost impossible heavy lifting on a personal basis in the UK, and she's showing it can be done. And we've now got to do it as a group. We've all got to do it. And don't just write to your MP or write to your councillors, be one. I'm on a parish council, I know Simon is, others can join them. Many of the parish councils don't have enough councillors on them. Go and join them. In Haslemere, we've declared a climate emergency. We've declared a climate emergency, we've set our target at 2030 net zero, and we're working on it. As a community, we haven't worked out how we're going to get there, and we are working on our definitions and our steps at the moment, but we're working on it. We've just written out to 145 other councils in the county, and we've had many come back to ask for us for our advice, our lead, and our suggestions. We know one or two are already now looking for declaring climate emergencies. We ourselves took inspiration from Haddenham and Tame, who have been very comprehensive in their survey of it. But 2050 is too late. And Martin Tett's idea when he put it out that it was 2050 or possibly 2030 is rubbish. It's got to be earlier. We can't leave it to 2050. If we head for 2030 and we miss it by a few years, oh, okay, that's not too bad. But if we head for 2050 and we miss it by a few years, we'll already be in the problems. We've got 1.5 degrees already baked in. We have already emitted enough to get the 1.5 degrees of global warming, which means the catastrophes will be worse than they are now. Yorkshire, Australia, Californian fires, everywhere else. We must move now. Greta Thunberg, President Macron, and Caroline Lucas from the Green Party were right. Our house is on fire, but they didn't tell you all the story. So the house is on fire, you've woken up. No one else in the family is awake. So you've staggered into their rooms, you've pushed them and you've woken them up. And staggering and scared, you all stagger down the stairs, you get to the front door and you want to get away from the fire. So you put your hand on the front door to open it and it's locked. So you go into the living room and you go up to the windows in the living room and you're trying to get out and you put your hands on them, but they're locked. And then you turn around and look at the fire in your house and you take action immediately and you throw everything on it to deal with it. The plant pots, you turn on the taps, you throw on the blankets and you do what you can to put it out. But when you put it out, with any luck, no one is dead. But when you put it out, you are left with a stinking, blackened, awful home that you have to rebuild. Well, that's where we are now, and no technological thing is going to get us out of it as far as it is at the moment. We have to do it. Actions like Rosalind, massive actions politically, and let's get to 2030 net zero or something equivalent very, very fast. Thank you.
Ed, can I just say thank you very much for that. I'm so pleased we had time for your presentation. I start warning to all of us, I think there, we just need another 56 million Rosalinds, it feels, in this country. Just an interesting point that prior to this conference, we sent a questionnaire around to members of the Chiltern Society and others. What they came back with was that the fact that government and industry were really seriously not impacting climate change, had real problems, and I think you touched on a little bit of that, Ed. I still think there is a general feeling, though, that individuals who rated themselves as we're all doing okay and not too bad on climate change still have more to go. And I feel there are lessons for us all there. So thank you very much, Ed.
Pleasure.
I'm going to move on and let Ed shoot off to his other engagement. Kath Daly, who's the countryside officer for the Chiltern Conservation Board. This board recently hosted a recent greener recovery in the Chilterns event. Some learning from that. Potentially, I'm sure the answer to this is not planting thousands of trees. I'm sure it will help, but it's not just going to be covered by a sort of a greening our local countryside. Kath, tell us more about where the CCB think things are going.
Thank you very much, Simon, and wonderful to hear all the speakers so far. Rosalind, that was really amazing. I'm glad to have heard it. You talked, Rosalind, about, I think you said nature's gift, and I was going to just say a little more about nature-based solutions to climate change, and then just had a couple of thoughts towards the end about making change happen. So I think the question that was posed originally was about how do we reach a carbon neutral Chilterns? And I think increasingly there's understanding that nature and low carbon farming are a key part of achieving net zero. And it's really important to work together with our farmers, our woodland owners, other land managers to support, encourage and make sure they've got the advice and resources they need to play their part in it. At the last general election, it feels a long, long time ago, political parties were falling over each other to offer up ever increasing targets for woodland and woodland expansion and tree planting. And woodland certainly is critical to, it has a part to play, as we know, in achieving net zero because of its potential to take carbon out of the atmosphere, and particularly broadly woodland. We do need to retain as much as possible, expand it out, but not at the expense of other important wildlife habitats. And ideally, we wouldn't be cutting it down to make a railway either through the Chilterns, but that's another story. I won't go into that. The Climate Change Committee, the UK's independent advisor on climate change, has called for transformational land use change, proposed that 22% of agricultural land in the UK should be put to alternative uses. And that includes forestry, it includes biofuels, and peatland restoration. So that would lead to 30,000 hectares of forest creation per annum in the UK, and a reduction of a projected reduction of UK emissions of between 4 and 8% by 2050. So what's our part in this? We're here in this part of the world, this beautiful farming and wooded landscape. So we are already one of the most wooded landscapes in the country, 21% woodland cover compared to 10% on average in England. 13% of the Chilterns is ancient woodland compared to 2% in the rest of the country. And in the past, there was a view that actually the priority was simply to maintain and better manage the woodlands that we have, which in many instances were not as biodiverse or well cared for as they could be. We are now, though, as an organisation, moving very much to the view that there certainly is potential for woodland expansion in the Chilterns. We need to be looking at this. It is not the only habitat that will contribute, but it is a significant contribution. So we're keen to explore with partners and landowners the scope for woodland expansion and increased connectivity. Having said that, we need to make sure that woodland, where it's created, is of the right kind in the right place so that it doesn't damage existing wildlife habitats. And we need to think carefully about the best approach. We want to consider, we should be considering natural regen, not only planting, and in some cases, some landowners we know are interested in looking at rewilding approaches. So it just depends on the area and the land holding. I also would put in a plea to say we need to recognise that woodlands are not just trees. They're dynamic mosaics of habitats and soils, and the open spaces and the glades and the woodland rise are just as important as the trees themselves from an overall biodiversity point of view. Turning to farming briefly, over 60% of the Chilterns is farmed, and it's really great, really encouraging to see increasing interest locally and nationally amongst farmers in conserving and improving soil carbon levels. And that's a critical bit of the jigsaw, again, that the Chilterns can play a part in. So farm carbon toolkits are increasingly available to help farmers audit and reduce their carbon emissions and increase carbon storage. And we need to, locally, we need to continue to support and encourage these approaches, and working with inspirational farmers like Ian Waller at Hampton Bottom, who are really already helping lead the way and egg on their neighbours to do the same. So farmer to farmer peer work is really critical in terms of engagement and enthusiasm. So we need to carry on supporting that. And if farmers are expected to be at the forefront of tackling the climate crisis through transformational land use change, which is what is being discussed, we need to work with that community. And then finally, just moving on to my second point around behaviour change, your talk, Rosalind, and Ed and Steve, it's all quite overwhelming, isn't it? Climate, most of us living our lives normally are not, this is not necessarily everything we're thinking about every day. It's not necessarily at the forefront of people's minds every day, and we recognise it needs to be more so. But let's be honest, we all know, most of us know the sorts of things we could do, but are we doing them? Tom challenged me to fill out the World Wildlife Fund carbon audit tracker, yeah, very sobering, very sobering. We should all be doing that. I highly recommend it. So I think it's surprisingly easy to use and a real sort of wake-up moment. But my point is, most people in society know what the things they should be doing. They might not know what's the most effective or the most efficient, but they know a list of things to stop doing or to start doing. But how do we get people to do it? Do we do it by, we can make policy change so that it's easier to do and so that the carbon footprint is more easily reduced. But I was really interested, and I will draw this to a close, I was really interested, I saw an interview with Greta Thunberg where she described a behaviour change study splitting people into 4 groups, each of which was exhorted to reduce their energy consumption, but they were all given different reasons. So first group encouraged to reduce consumption to save money. The second group, to save the environment. The third group encouraged to think of their children's future. The fourth group was told how their energy consumption compared to their neighbours. And that was the group that reduced. It was the fourth group that reduced the most. And I would just suggest that we need to be really smart about what is it, to understand behavioural science really, and to understand how humans work, and how do we get ourselves and others to change our behaviour. We're social animals, we copy each other's behaviour. How can we use that knowledge to actually try to precipitate more change? So I want to thank the Children's Society for bringing us together on this. We do need to mobilise far more action for a carbon neutral Chilterns, and I'm really keen to be part of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kath. I was just looking up what signifies behaviour change, and I'm sure somewhere at the beginning there is acceptance that you've got a problem. This is the start of making that problem visible. You did mention peatland restoration. I think that's really key, and it's mentioned a lot in the press. And also, obviously, the key partnership that we all have with the farming community in this part of the world. I'm going to come next to John Meech. John is a trustee of the Buckinghamshire branch of CPRE, the rural charity, who state climate emergency is the biggest threat facing our countryside and planet. And I don't think anybody can deny that. John, over to you.
I think you may need to unmute, John. Well done.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, the Chiltern Society, for bringing us all together to talk about what is, frankly, a daunting topic, actually. CPRE, as someone said, it's a countryside charity that campaigns to promote and enhance and protect the countryside, actually. And our strategy now, although working with communities, business, local government and government, etc., really climate change and the climate crisis actually underpins everything that we want to do. So for me, and I think as Rosalind and others have shown, that there's many things that individuals can do, but as the chat has shown, that you know, individuals can't do everything on their own, but I think we can influence one another. I mean, for instance, at CPRE, we don't just want to build back better, we want to build using the latest research on ground which is not going to take up part of the carbon sink, as it were. Things like dual fuel boilers. We can't all convert to hydrogen at the moment, but we may be able to in the future. So why not get ready for things like dual fuel boilers, where you can use the current infrastructure. Rewilding, I think, is really important, and of course you know, Kath spoke about agriculture in the Chilterns, and we've got to make farming part of the solution, actually, not part of the problem. Okay, we've got to eat less meat. We should eat locally. We should reduce our as well as our air miles, we should reduce our food miles as well. But I think at the individual level, and particularly for the Chilterns, most people in the Chilterns have got gardens, okay? And to use Rosalind's word, that's nature's gift. That is the natural carbon sink. And one thing we're thinking of doing at CPRE is to ensure that we get rewilding education in. If everybody could plant some seeds, for example, encourage the wildlife, and that I think is going to help us bring the carbon down. And if we could get more people to do it rather than just a few individuals, we need to engage our peers, our colleagues, our friends, everybody in the village, and so on to do these things. So much to do, and whilst it's daunting, I think if we're not optimistic that we can do it, we won't. So I think big targets, shorter time scales, and we work and behave individually as Rosalind has suggested. Try and get to that as much as we can. But also, I believe we do need to lobby our politicians. We do need to, become those politicians, if you will, because we do need serious policy change as well as individual change. Thanks.
John, thank you very much. You picked up on something that others have mentioned, which is not only using the latest technology, but that people have talked about a number of different technologies. And I just wonder how widespread, known and accessible some of those technologies do seem to be across the piece. So I think one of the duties that we all have is about spreading the knowledge and spreading the information around so others can participate in this. Thank you very much for your contribution. Dan, I'm coming to you last. Dan's the Vice Chair of the Chiltern Society. I would say from this morning, self-dubbed Eco Apprentice, which I love that title. But also Dan leading for the Cleaner Greener campaign, of which the this afternoon's seminar and conference is part of. Dan, take it away.
Dan, you're on quiet again, sorry.
Sorry. Thanks everyone on the panel. Just Rosalind, amazingly creative, hopeful, you know, bits of despair spread around all of us, but actually without this message of hope, and you are such a beacon of that, Rosalind, then we're not going to get anywhere. So I love all the different approaches. They've all been slightly coming from a different perspective, but we need to just bring them all together and head in the same direction for me. So the good thing is that I would say I totally buy into what everything said. So I don't know, maybe I should just go home right now, but panel views, I think you're supposed to argue a bit, but just everything everybody said I can sign up to. In particular, the messages from Rosalind and Ed, we need to just wake up, smell the roses and get on with it. And the good news, I think, as far as Chiltern Society is concerned, is so do our members. So thank you everyone who's listening, who responded to the online voting. And I'd just like to say, Steve, we got an even higher percentage than you at Bucks there. So we've got 98% of people that do realize climate change is a serious threat to our lifestyles and we need to do something about it. So the issue I have, which some people have addressed, and this theme, if you like, was running through all of the talks so far, is this theme of metamorphosis. We've got to change, and there have been suggestions about hydrogen versus electric in the chat and what's better, etc. But the point is, we are all going to have to change how we live, and I think Rosalind has given us a great guiding light to follow in. But the other point is that there have been some views it's a government issue, government should be leading, pushing, forcing things down on us. But I think this is one area, and the survey has certainly reflected this, and I'll share results afterwards, but this is absolutely all of our responsibility to do something. So it's not the government's going to fix it, it's you and me working with the government and with industry and the farmers and everyone to fix it. And I think the main message from Ed for me is we just need to get on. We all know it, there's no kind of doubts here anymore, we need to get on and do it. So we're relatively wealthy in the Chilterns when you look at what Rosalind showed on the kind of global scale is, so we really should be getting on with it. So that's all great. There's certainly in my mind, I'm very passionate about doing something, but I struggle with knowing what to do next. What is the right thing? Because you can make lots of different choices, but which one is the right choice? So for example, electric cars sounds great, you're going to save carbon, but as Rosalind did allude to, there's an embedded carbon footprint in buying the new car. So great, I'm saving on my car, but I've just spent 35 tons of carbon to buy it. So how on earth do I pay that back? There has to be something that we can introduce to help us pay that sort of thing back. A small example, at the Chiltern Society, we're moving all of our documentation online, so it's kind of in the server cloud. Is that better or is that worse than us all sending email rounds with attachments? Well, lots of research from Microsoft tells me it's much better to have it in the cloud, but is it or not? So it seems to me that every fix that I try and make or think about just generates its own concern. And I'm really going to be fascinated to get some input from the panel on what they think about some of these. But just as some examples, we stopped using weed killer last year in the garden, but in fact that's nearly killed us, having to work out how to live with the weeds, work around the weeds, change the weeds around. It's not as easy as it looks. I'd love to cycle more. I've got an electric bicycle now, which is supposed to be great. I hope Rosalind gives me a little pat on the back for that. But I've got restrictions on taking my bicycle into London on the train. So I can't go before 10 o'clock in the morning, which right now clearly is not an issue, but in the future it is. So how can I use an electric bicycle to help me commute into the city when actually the train times won't allow me to do it? I can plant more trees. If I plant more trees, I lose some chalk grassland. So is that good or bad? I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, so I'm not going to keep going on about these issues because somehow my conclusion is that we just have to do things and move on. Some will be right, some will be wrong, but we do not have great white knights coming around in the near future like fusion, like some of the suggestions that have been made about the decarbonation of the atmosphere. Ed's made it very clear they're not available now. So we do need to start doing things. So what am I actually doing? So on the micro scale, I'm trying to do everything I can. So I'm cutting less grass, as people have suggested. I try and buy as much recycled clothing as I can, with the highest possible recycled content in the clothing. I'm washing my clothes less, wearing them longer. So probably a good thing we're on a remote call here. Nobody else gets to smell that. I'm using fewer chemicals. I'm reusing all the water I can. I'm recycling. I'm hoping, Steve, that Bucks Council is doing a good job on the recycling. It's going where I think it's going, because I'm trying to do my best here. But for example, Japan has 7 different types of recycling bin, whereas we only seem to have 3. So I'm hoping that that's all being dealt with. But that's a good example of where the council and the government needs to be doing its part, because I don't have much I can do about that. So gradually I'm doing all these things. No weed killer. I've tried to switch to electric cars. I'm trying to power the electric cars through installing solar everywhere. But as soon as I start thinking about installing solar, I've got to think about the embedded carbon footprint of installing the solar panels in the first place. But I'm trying to get this balance whereby if I am putting in any of these new systems, I have to pay it back within 3 years for me, so that I'm meeting that 2025 target, if you like. So I'm trying to do everything I can personally to meet that. So that's great, because I feel like I'm trying to do my bit, but I also feel a responsibility to other parts of the world where they are dealing with a problem they haven't necessarily caused. So I realize I need to do more. We all need to do more, frankly, given the luxury of where we've been brought up and where we live. So what do I do about my children's carbon footprint? Am I responsible for that? Do I need to help them offset their carbon? And I would love to start trying to answer these questions on a systematic basis. So what I am trying to persuade the Chiltern Society to do, and I hope we can kind of agree as we go through debating this, is that we start up a new group to help inform our local community across the Chilterns about what we can all do to make things better, what really does work, what really makes a difference today. Planting trees is great, because although we might think we can't just plant trees everywhere, that's true, but you don't have to spend loads of carbon to go and grow and plant more trees. We can all do that. And so it's just trying to balance them. And at the same time, I'd love us to try and agree. For example, as a Chiltern Society, why wouldn't we try and agree that, listening to Ed, by 2025, why don't we try and make sure we are all carbon neutral? Why can't we all be living the 1-ton lifestyle at that time? So I would love to challenge ourselves on that. And at that point, I'm going to leave it and hand it over to us in the panel. Thanks, Simon.
I'll unmute myself. Thank you, Dan. That was really excellent. As Dan suggests, what we're going to do is now just throw this open a bit more. And please keep your questions coming. But I think it's only right to perhaps go back to Rosalind to respond to some of the things that not only have been put in the question and answers, but I'd like to hear, Rosalind, apart from it's obvious you just need to start doing it now, how can we support people, as Dan said, individually doing some of this stuff as you have done? Rosalind. Oh, you need to read that book. You need to take yourself off mute, Rosalind.
Yeah, I put this, I mean, before this was published, actually, I put it in my manifesto. I think every single household needs a manifesto, sorry, not manifesto, a handbook. Because to become carbon literate from virtually nothing, this is very new. And I think that without a handbook to support people in doing this, I think that it is quite daunting. Now, I really trust Mike. I think he's got a good heart, and he's come at this, really researched in a way that is readable and cares about, people understanding this very sort of complex subject and making it very accessible. So I think that it's extremely important that people have access to kind of education, because I think at the moment the education part of it is still really important. I think people's understanding of what they need to do with their carbon footprint is still at quite a basic level. The other thing is that I think we need to support each other in this. I think without that support, so whether that's building community groups with the Children's Society or further out into community, I think it's extremely important to support people in different ways, because some people have a really pretty what's the word? Yeah, the trajectory is pretty strong to go from how they're living now to net carbon zero, or even to be cutting their carbon. And I think that we need to let people know that this is culturally okay. This is acceptable to start living this new lifestyle. It's also desirable. It's also valued. And you aren't going to be alone in this. We can find a way together, because I think otherwise, if you just leave people on their own, in a kind of cultural bubble where the media is telling them that the more they consume, the better they are, the more they're valued, and we really need to change that cultural conversation to something very different. That our value system we can live in a different way. It doesn't have to be worse. It's just different. But I would like to get more involved in really helping us in that as well.
Rosalind, thank you. Steve, I'm going to come to you, because there was an interesting question on the question and answers, which was about local community engagement, and this was around assemblies, public assemblies, etc. Now, Buckinghamshire have just launched, well, about 6 months ago, 16 community boards. Is there a sense that this climate emergency, or as dubbed, is very high on their agenda?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. You're right. The county now has 16 community boards. Members are on it. Members of the public are invited along, and we hope they participate. Each of those groups can set its own priority agendas, and a number of them, I don't know the exact number, have a climate or carbon-based subgroup, if you like, that will look at that in the local areas. And then I only alluded to this in brief, but then working with parishes, groups such as your own, to try and turn that into this point of literacy. What does that mean to someone's life? This ultimately, if I talk from a business point of view, this is a massive organizational change program. What we're changing here is the organization of our lives and how we interact with one another. But that only ever makes sense. Policies are great, strategies are great, but only when every cog, every wheel in how that all works together understands the role they can play and where the ambition lies. And so I think the community boards have a real point to play in this, because that will very much talk about your street, your area, your village. Whereas clearly, as a whole council, or even as a national government, you won't necessarily feel that immediate affinity. So we've heard about Hazelmere, for example. Well, community board would talk about somewhere different, like it might be Great Kingshill, or it might be a specific part of Aylesbury, for example. I mentioned that trial going on. So I think there's a real opportunity for the voice to be heard. And I think there's been a lot of crossovers in the speakers today. So I talked about behavioural economics and nudge theory, and Rosalind had talked about the Venn diagram from Mike's book and her experience in how we bring everyone along. And Kath had done likewise in behaviours in communities. And so the lower that goes down to a local level, the easier a step it is for someone to get involved and speak and listen, and the easier it is for us to make those choices, that every choice mattered, those choices make sense. So the fact Rosalind's put up there 50 grams or whatever it was for sending a long email. There'll be some parts of consumption that, and I'll be as guilty of this as the next person, you don't really think about. And so what we need to do is yes, there'll be policies. Yes, that's top down, but there has to be top down, a push-pull part to this. You know, I talked about how attitudes change when regulations can either give a reward or you're fearful of the stick, if you like. And I think we need both. We need people to, you know, Ed spoke strongly about where we may end up if we don't move, but similarly, people need to turn that into, well, what can I do to help? And ultimately, that's where communities are the secret weapon, I think, in all of this. And if just while I have the floor to answer Dan's question on recycling, the 2019 figures, Bucks recycles 58% of its waste, which is one of the best in England, because the average in 2019 was 43%. We do lots of items. Perversely, you might think when you first hear me say, some of the local recycling centres, the really small ones, the bottle banks and the like, have gone. And the reason they have gone is because actually Bucks recycling at curbside collections is very good compared to those who we benchmark. And therefore, you don't need to get in a car to take your empty bottles. It will come from the curbside. So actually, even things like that, by pitching for excellence in service delivery, we can have an impact. And I think that idea that then Dan was talking about everything is interlinked, that's probably a great example of how that can work. And if I may, I'm stretching the point slightly, you may not know that I spent about 8 years of my life living and working in East Africa. And there, when you see choices, and you see actually, okay, they're powering the little stall with a kerosene lamp, but things are getting transported by bike, and you couldn't do anything but eat local, then we need people there to have some economic empowerment, but then we can do the reverse learning and say, okay, we should be giving technology so the kerosene lamps aren't needed, but we're going to take back the principle of moving around on bikes and eating local. So even telling the stories, as Rosalind suggested we do at Christmas, is really important. And I started my comments earlier about schools. And actually, if only we could get together at the Christmas table this year, who knows, we might. But having different generations talk to one another, I find, at least in my family, really helps.
Thank you, Steve. Ed, can I just say there's been a lot of really fantastic positive comments about your enthusiasm and passion about this subject. I'm going to pose you a question. So lots of people have talked about nudge. I understand a nudge is a good way of sort of over time making the public to do different things. But do we have the time for nudge? Is it nudge, or is it something a bit more radical that people need to do? Ed, over to you.
There's no easy answer to that. It's both. So starting on the nudge, probably the thing that drives me crazy the most when I talk to people about what they're doing for the environment is when I hear people say, I'm doing my bit. Right, well, doing your bit's not enough. Doing an extra bit every single day of your life is enough. Increasing it, looking at the ideas that other people are doing and just increasing what you're doing, perfecting what you're doing every single day, a little bit extra. But we are never going to get there without serious action by our leaders. The youth are out on the streets, whether it's Greta, whether it's a relatively youthful Extinction Rebellion, though they're not all, whether it's the student climate strikers, they're out there, but it's the 40, 50, 60-year-olds who are in power who have actually got to take some big decisions. Within a government focus, we have to get government at every single level, starting at the parish councils, going up through the county councils and other levels, up to the government, to focus. And what we need to do is we need to vote people in that are going to go for a 2030 net zero target, and we need to vote them into power. We need to have a focus on a very, very, very simple thing. If we don't focus our politicians, they get distracted. You can hear, by the way, every politician talks, there's too much fluff around it all the time, and there isn't enough focus on what we really need to do. And with all of our community boards, for instance, at the moment, there are only one or two that are focused actually on climate change, although it's meant to be included in lots of the others parameters. That's not enough. We have to have a focus. And within the county, we need to say it's not 2050, it's 2030. Let's get there. And every single decision we take is focused on getting to 2030 net zero. So whether it's transport, whether it's schools, whether it's what we do in the NHS. When we had World War II, we spent 50% of our GDP on fighting World War II, and we won it. We've had similar kind of usage of public finances now on COVID. Well, you know, climate change and biodiversity loss has reached the beaches of Normandy, and we've got to take massive action on it. We have got to focus on winning the war, and then everything else drops into place to do it. Focus on beating COVID, and it should be that the other actions drop into place to do it. And that's what we've got to do now. So individual, do a little bit more every day, and then push our political and business leaders to do what they are. And if you're not happy with them, stand against them.
Thank you, Ed. Dan, have you got anything you wanted to say on top of that? There are a few chats aligned with your thinking. Any comments?
No, I don't. I'd rather open it up to the floor. Actually, let's answer some of our members'
See what's out there. Okay. Is there anybody who would like to ask the panel a question? Have we got some key people? I've seen some comments about, Steve, I've seen some comments about local community boards, that they do have it on their agenda, but I'm not sure how much it's really discussed and how big a priority. And I think that's something that maybe locally we need to hold people to account on. I think with your support, I'm sure that'd be good.
Hey, Doug has asked a good question here, Simon.
Go for it.
About how we get the low carbon choices picked up by the majority of people, as most will regard them as some sort of hippie, home weave, sandal wearing, weirdy choices. Some might react violently. A fundamental change is needed. So perhaps the panel might help us suggest how we could get people to change.
I'm going to start with you, Rosalind. It was just obviously your self-belief that you started on your journey. How can other people get motivated to do this?
I have a feeling it's not a one side. Am I on mute now?
No, you're fine.
Okay. I have a feeling it's not a one size fits all kind of approach. I think people respond to different things, but I think the family, talking with family and friends, that can, for some people, kind of just open the door for them. But for other people, it's facts. It's people like Ed really knocking on the door and really, you know, giving them the lowdown. Some people may, I mean, I'm going to say violent, but they can be quite angry. You know, I've had times when people have been really angry at me, and then I've met them a year later, and they say, "Oh, yeah, I thought about it a lot afterwards, and I started to understand what this is all about." So, having had that experience quite a lot, I think that you shouldn't take people's initial kind of defensive reaction as a kind of their final sort of understanding of it, or the final response to it. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time for it to filter down. So I always think that spread out, you know, throw out the seeds. You know, just talk about it, communicate in whatever way you can, in whatever environment you can, whatever, you know, sort of way you can, and you'll be surprised that even though the seeds may not, you know, they may not flower immediately, a lot of people, it sets something in motion, and then they start to want to do more and learn more. So I think just don't give up and just try anything, you know, try everything and anything, you know, as Ed said, you know, we don't have the luxury of time. So just, you know, open and, you know, show people what you're doing, show the fun things that you're doing, show things that are making you fit or healthy or, you know, lose weight, you know, whatever you think that person may want to, you know, engage with. There's sort of, you know, you have to use your instinct a little bit on that.
Yeah. And Rosalind, we have nearly 7,000 members online. Were there any online lessons that you learned about influencing people?
Sorry, me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I mean, actually, you might be surprised, but my journal and my project, my one-time project, I mean, it's global. You know, when I go and look at who's looking at my website, I mean, there's somebody regularly in Nepal, but I mean, really, it's across the globe. And, you know, people are very interested in this in the UK, across the UK, Europe, but across the world, because everybody wants to. I mean, I felt when I started it, I stepped through a portal, and I think a lot of us are sort of around that portal, and it's like something that we feel we want to do, but there are different things that I think help people step through that portal, and I think that is sometimes the early adopters. It is people who are prepared to just do it and make it up as they go along, get things wrong, you know, make a little bit of a fool of themselves from time to time. Just do it. And then actually maybe to then follow, become through that portal becomes just a little bit easier, becomes a little less mysterious, a little bit more, yeah, okay, I think this might be doable. Maybe if I try this, I can get a little bit closer to that.
Thanks. Thank you.
Rosalind, can I just ask you, and perhaps Dan and other panelists, because it does seem that there are a number of areas that actions needed on. One's transport, something about food and farming. Then there's another element about lifestyles, and so there seem to be a number of subject areas. Do you think smaller groups initiated across the county to debate, discuss, to think on would be beneficial to support some of those agendas? Because it does feel like if you look at the whole plethora of things you might do in terms of you know, reducing your carbon footprint, it's almost too daunting to start. Does that make sense?
Sorry, who is that? Is that
well, Rosalind, I was just thinking, are there some natural groups of subjects that people should concentrate on and perhaps debate and discuss?
Yeah, I think if people feel a natural affinity and have some knowledge about a particular subject, and they feel drawn to it, because I think if you feel passionate about something, then that's always a good starter. And it might be easier, as you say, especially if you're communicating with the council, to break things up into yes. But I'm always, I feel sort of always mixed about this, because I think somebody said about silos. I'm always mindful that yes, you need to maybe look in more detail in isolation different subjects, but they all need to interconnect. Yeah. And so you have to be very careful when you do that there is some sort of joined up response as well. Otherwise you can be transport, for instance, which can link up with you know, food buying and maybe a farmer's market. So you might want to make your putting in a new cycling network that, you know, families can use, children can use. You might want that, you know, sort of directed towards farmers markets, or you sorry, I'm losing connection. Yeah, towards the farmers market, or towards a hospital, or towards you know, sort of leisure and outside activities. So you would want these all these things to be linked up, so that you're creating a lifestyle that is interconnected and that isn't, you know, like councils and government sometimes do, which is think of things very separately. So I'm sort of saying yes and no, I guess.
Yeah, so Steve, I think I saw you nodding on that. There are a couple of questions that would be quite good to also answer in terms of, you know, are there groups that we can form? There was something around, are we not looking out for government leadership? All the greenest governments ever have done little or nothing. And then there was also something about vested interests of business. Steve, thoughts?
Well, I haven't, if they were comments you're reading out or from your head, I'll have to check.
The comments made by attendees today.
Okay, so clearly, as I tried to illustrate earlier, there's a role for regulation, there's a role for the law, and if you like, government setting the rules of the game, as it were. That's all fine on one side, and already the green growth economy is predicted to give us about 4 times as much growth than traditional. Clearly, this was the first, our government was the first major government to legislate at least for 2050. And of course, our national government have the presidency for the COP26 conference that'll now be next year instead of this. So we talk sometimes in this conversation quite a lot about the big ticket stuff. And I still, you know, transport, we just throw the word transport around. But what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? Because transports are someone who's retired and maybe can no longer drive, or someone who only has access to a bike, may be very different to someone who's commuting every day, for example. So when I talked earlier about demand-driven things, the way to get this change, the mass movement that's been mentioned, is people ultimately have to make this personal for themselves. And on the whole, human nature may take, for the majority, the line of least resistance. So if we can say, and we've done a trial even up at, for example, local example, on Creswick's Business Park, of mapping with the businesses where people are traveling in from via their postcode. And there's now systems that exist to say, well, rather than each of you driving in every day, we can do shared transport. That would obviously have a big impact. Now, that barrier to making the change is a far lower one than it is to say, no, you can't commute anymore, you can't go and work there, or you must always get on your bike. In many ways, the bike would obviously be ideal, but we've used the phrase, at least 2 or 3 of the panelists today, about being on a journey, and that's the journey. If you start with people making a step, be it as a group or be it ideally as an individual and as a household, then that's where you build momentum. And then people feel like what was originally a small step becomes a greater stride, and then you make bigger change. And so I think I'm always hesitant to think the top-down aspect here is the way to go. I think there can be some carrots. I think you just mentioned vested interests of business. Well, the vested interest of business will be to do what sells and what works and what generates. And if the people then say, this is what we would like. So for example, I mentioned having energy companies only supplying 100% renewable energy tariffs. We need to make access to that so people are aware what the choices are. And I also sit on the left. There's a green business growth agenda that can begin to put the policies in place to say to people, this is where businesses would be, or let's take housing. If we need higher standards, and this was included in the council's response to the climate change motion, it's likely we'll have, new planning regulations, etc. And national government are giving funds behind, Rosalind mentioned retrofitting houses. Even during the COVID pandemic, there's been the launch of the Green Home Funds to help do some matching. And I think, again, that's helping people who maybe got access to more capital to make that change with a heat pump boiler. The new boilers, gas boilers should cease to come into new developments in 2025. And that's the pull factor I mentioned earlier. That's where we can, there's the carrot dangle before people to make the change. But I come back to what I said, if we just wait for that, it's the wrong end of the scale. We have to say to people, we can make these changes now. And we've talked about literacy, and that's what it is. Make a small change, get this benefit, bank it. Then what's next? What's next? And if we set that ambition, then I think at all levels, so people and at all institutional levels, as I mentioned earlier, then we'll get the groundswell.
I'm going to come to you, Rosalind, but I'm just notifying people that we've just got almost five minutes left. Rosalind, did you want to make one last point? Then I'm going to ask some of our panelists to sum up. Rosalind.
Yes, I just wanted to sort of come back, Steve, a little bit, because I think maybe I still don't hear that he's understood that this is a mobilisation. This is on the scale too. This is the kind of ambition we need. This sort of tinkering and adding a little bit here, there, and there. It's not going to do it. We're not in that world. We're in the world where the government needs to listen to the people, and the people, yes, they need to find ways of moving their lifestyles in that direction. That is the responsibility of all of us, but they need the government support to do that. They need the mobilisation and the money being put into decarbonising homes, to retrofitting homes. This is the absolute priority. The two things that I would say that are going to be absolutely paramount are the decarbonisation of homes, so people are not going to freeze and that they can have hot water, and the ability to move around their local community by walking and cycling. Those are top, and then joined up with public transport. This is going to give people a good quality of life. If we don't have government mobilisation and funding for these things, and this doesn't happen immediately, we are going to find ourselves in a situation where things are going to spiral out of control, and we won't have the resources to address it. Everything needs to be done now, and it needs to be done seriously, and it needs to be done at scale, and it needs to be done in a way that really understands the issue. And I know it's difficult for politicians to stand up and be counted on this, but you are in this place at this time, and therefore you have the opportunity to lead, and that is something very special. And I think that it would be a tragedy if you didn't realise it, but then act on it.
I'm going to.
Can I not respond to that, then, Simon?
Yeah, no, Steve, I'm going to come to you. Don't you worry. I'm going to just slightly extend. If people can bear with us, I think we've got to the nub really of the argument. It's been a fantastic and fascinating afternoon. We've heard many responses and inputs from many of the people who've attended, and we've tried to pick up most of those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with you, Steve, but I'm going to go through the whole of the panelists to ask them, actually, given the discussion we've had this afternoon, what are you and your organisations going to do differently about climate change and the emergency we are all in? Steve, starting with you.
Thanks, Simon. Look, I think it's been a fantastic discussion this afternoon, and just on the what are we doing? I tried to lay out in my comments earlier, and then I ended up using the word trust, but I tried to lay out we're at a point in time where that movement is happening, and it's happening not only just out there, but it's happening in places like the council. The 5 councils have come together. I talked about the strategy plan that's emerging. I've tried to make the point that we have a cross-party group who are holding the executive to account as much as possible to make that as ambitious as possible within the parameters of what's been set. And so if I were to sum up, is that the easiest thing in the world is to say people aren't taking action, which again is why I try to highlight there are physical things that happen and there are some policy shifts. Or, we have to lead in terms of where the expectation and the ambition will go, what the policy drivers for that will be. I mentioned planning, about unlocking better use of first and last mile in transport, all the things that mean people's lives, which is why we're here. Council exists on behalf and for the benefit of the residents, and to pull the levers that we can to make those choices easy, but to implement then national or at least our county policy to give a credible route through to net carbon. And that is what we're trying to do. And I'm here today fully listening, because my role involves having to represent public voice into that process, as well as clearly serving the residents of my own ward. And then therefore riding that wave of desire. That's why I gave you the statistics I had on surveys that we've done and surveys that have been done nationally, that this is the expectation. And I think if nothing else, I finished on the word trust, but the expectation from the public is that their politicians of any stripe will deliver something, and they need to understand that we will deliver something that is credible and gets us through. There's people on this panel who may wish things to be different, but it's about the will. And I think, therefore, we're in a position where that will exists, and we deliver it as quickly as possible, and we deliver it into help our communities to form as well. Because, as I said, there's a top-down and there's a bottom-up aspect to this.
Steve, I'm going to push you a bit on this one, because even if it's just recommending everybody to read Tim Berners-Lee's books sorry, not Tim,
Mike.
Mike's book in the council, what else can the Buckinghamshire Council do differently, perhaps from the things that you heard today? Is there something that you can do around community boards? Is there something about groups? Is there something about visibility? Is there education, a whole range of things? Are there any things from today you can take away and say, do you know what, we're going to look at doing this differently?
Well, I think the community boards is a vital aspect, because in terms of policy, that process is underway, as I've been talking about. The community boards are live. They're the ones that represent the communities. So even I can commit to, with the chairman of the Transport, Environment and Climate Change Select Committee, I can write to the chairman of each of those community boards and say, and maybe if you're going to send me the link to this online, and suggest that actually, if they watch some of the commentary in here and make sure that as many people in their community and groups in their community, be it the parish councils, like street association and so on, are aware of what the community board is doing on this topic, then I think that's, pushing back out the message to help with that engagement piece.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve. Ed, what might you do differently based on today's conversation and your organisation?
Well, within the organisation, actually, we've already had something planned that's come out of the 20 talks or so we've had this week, where we've had quite a few councillors and other politicians tuning in from around UK and around the world. We're going to run a day or a 2-day event, probably in conjunction with the National Association of Local Councils. One of them is on the talks, to make sure that councillors get the science. I mean, it's really about getting it deep down in your gut, the problem that we've got, in order to start taking massive action. It's very clear that Steve doesn't get it. My apologies, Steve, for calling you out on it, but within the Conservative Party, there are those that get it. I'm not an anti-Conservative by any means at all. And in fact, there is a Conservative Environmental Network, of which I am a member, because you don't have to be in the Conservative Party to be a member. There are found 50 Conservative MPs in it and a whole lot of councillors. I wish there were a whole lot more Bucks councillors in it. And it's a little bit like going to a meeting of Extinction Rebellion with everyone in pinstripe suits. They really get it. But these people have got to be motivated, and we need to get more of the Conservative Party into groups like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to run an event. We're going to be advising local councils, parish councils and others how to declare a climate emergency, how to get the science so they can convince the councils to do it, and then how to move faster on it. We've heard about, Steve was talking about leadership. And again, I think actually that the leadership on this issue has been absolutely deplorable. So we have MPs that really haven't done anything on it in the area, and they need to be pushed towards taking more action. And in fact, I'm so fed up with the lack of leadership by council that I'll stand against you when it comes around to the county council elections. And when I get in, we're going to be pushing for climate change action to be done immediately and for it all to be taken seriously. and I'll be standing up on the floor and making sure everybody actually understands the science and will actually get moving on it. So those who are standing in Hazelmist, you can let them know I'm going to stand against them just to make sure that this issue is taken seriously. In addition to that, I think that we should all be concentrating on what we can do ourselves. One thing we haven't talked about today, it's highly controversial, and I'm not going to express a personal huge opinion on it, I'm going to highlight it. But within the scientist warnings, we talk about all the things that have been talked about today, but the 20,000 scientists also signed up to say that population is a big issue on this planet. And it doesn't matter whether you're looking at populations in developing countries which are expanding fast, or worse still, populations in our country that aren't declining fast enough because of our massive consumption. So within the thing, unfortunately, we have to consider that within what we're doing. Being a Catholic, it's a conundrum for me, but the Pope has actually not come out to say anything against this, and is obviously a huge environmentalist, as we all know. So we must consider that with everything else. And in fact, if you really want to reduce your footprint, first thing is responsible procreation. The next thing is don't fly. The next thing is don't eat meat. And the next thing is don't drive. I've so far stuck with driving. Rosalind is a bit of an inspiration. I wonder if I could manage without a car completely. So that's, from a personal point of view, is something I'll be looking at. I already have a lot of no drive days. I'm often seen cycling around Hazelmere in my luminescent cycling trousers, because I try to do that whenever there's not two people in the car, and I'll try to do a lot more of that. So thank you so much for having me today. It's been brilliant.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much for your comments. I'm now going to come to some of the organisations. Kath, Daly, let's hear just the last word from you, and what might the Chiltern Conservation Board do differently from today?
Thank you very much. There's so much, isn't there, that we could look at. I think personally, I'm going to keep going back to that WWF carbon footprint tool, and actually make the changes, start to just work down a pathway of making the changes in my personal life that would get me further along the road. And I recommend that to everybody. In terms of the Chilterns Conservation Board, for my own role, I head up our land and nature section. So my focus will be on looking again at how we can push forward with more urgency some of the work around nature-based solutions, and how we can actually precipitate more action on that. There will be other things we can do as an organisation, because we also are very involved in access, walking, cycling and so forth. So I'll go back and talk with my colleagues. Thank you. And thirdly, I guess an open invitation an open offer from me to work with you guys in the Children's Society on whatever you do decide to set up, if that helps.
Thank you, Dan. I think we're going to decide to set up lots of things, and we'll hear from Dan in a moment. Before we hear from Dan, John, you're the trustee, Campaign for the Protection of Rural England, CPRE, campaigning. What more are you going to do in terms of trying to make a difference from your side of things?
Well, it seems to me that from today, I don't believe that the average person on the Aylesbury omnibus gets the urgency of this. I don't believe that the average person is necessarily carbon literate. I think that collaboratively, if we're going to have bottom-up change and bottom-up pressure, then what we've got to do as an organisation actually is to educate people. We've got to teach people to read carbon. And if they can read carbon, then I think we can generate the will to change, actually. And I think it can't be a long haul, because it's clear that it's urgent. And I think we will need to be very clear when it comes to Buckinghamshire Council coming up with new local plans, that they have to include the right materials, the right way of building, the right density of building to be carbon efficient, and to ensure that people can use their bicycles, that they can walk, that they can get to public transport very, very easily. And I think if we can do that, and like Kath, I think if we can collaborate in creating that carbon literacy and teaching people to read carbon, then we can do some of the good things bottom up, because I don't believe it's going to happen quickly top down.
I feel a network forming. Thank you very much, John. That's really helpful. Dan.
So yeah, interesting. Lots of comments about population. You know what? There are possibly too many people on the planet. I'm not really going to comment on that, but there is enough food to feed everyone, and there is enough energy that could be produced by the sun to give everyone the energy they need to live a perfectly acceptable life. Certainly, if you take that Rosalind's experience into account. So for me, I think the important thing is what we need to do is mobilize and get at least just start people on this zero carbon journey. So that will be my next thing that I will try and do, is to get our 7,000 members to carbon neutral. There must be a pathway through this with local government, with local farmers, with local industry, with our members, with our volunteers. We need to get this message out, and we need to find a way of getting to carbon zero by 2025 as an organization. And that is what I'm going to try and do next.
And Dan, I'm going to pick up one of the things that you mentioned right at the beginning. Yes, the Chiltern Society will have a separate key stream around net carbon zero. This whole subject needs far more emphasis, I think, as part of what we're doing. And then as I pick up from other organisations, there's a big collaborative approach on that. And I know people like the Natural Environment Partnership, which Buckinghamshire Council basically host. They will be looking at this, and there's some partnership work we can do with them. I'm going to come for last comments really to yourself, Rosalind. You started this all off just over 2 hours ago with very much a personal journey, and I think it is really about what we can all do personally. Some of your notes and tips and hints are going to be absolutely useful for anybody following today's conversation and wants to do more. Rosalind, last comments.
Thank you so much for letting me share that journey, because I think when I set out, I mean, I didn't really know exactly what it would be, or even how long I was going to be able. And I found that I hadn't really discussed this, but it did change me quite profoundly in ways that I hadn't imagined. And I think it's quite important to explain that you know, this living within planetary boundaries actually feels good. I'm not saying it isn't a bit rough around the edges, and that we don't need you know, the government to step up and help us, you know, make this change. But I think that we all know deep down in our gut that something isn't right with our climate, and things are becoming unstable. And so then when you move into a space where you are aligning with planetary boundaries, there is a good feeling to that. There is a feeling that you are not contributing to the problem. And I think that people will be surprised that they've known it all along. And it just took a little bit more to push them in that direction. So I open that up to people as a kind of invitation.
Can I just say, Rosalind, thank you so much, and thank you so much to our other panelists. Thank you so much to all who've basically been there for the last 2.5 hours or so. It's been an absolutely fascinating and brilliant discussion. Lots of passion, enthusiasm, very personal, I think, and that's been useful, because actually we can learn from others, and we can take our lead from what others have tried, and most of all, impactful. I think we've all taken something away from this afternoon's conversation. I just want to pick up on a few things. One is something about let's make this far more visible, something about focus on the key things. Discussion with your friends and family. I think that was a great theme, but I think that's important to encourage others to do like you might be doing. There's something around nudge, and how can we put out the constant messages to get people thinking about the environment, about their carbon footprint. Please, 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 if you haven't, use the World Wildlife Fund carbon footprint monitor. That link has been sent round with the invites to the event today. This event will be then put out there in the public domain. Please share it with others. We'd like to get lots of people talking about it, and keep those comments coming. And also read the book. Please read the book. I think that's going to be very useful. Hold it up, Rosalind. Brilliant. How Bad Are Bananas? Excellent. A must for every book club around the Chilterns, I would suggest, over the next few months. And I do declare this a climate emergency, but we've started the ball rolling today, and we need to keep that ball rolling. Thank you very much for your participation. Very good to see everybody in front of me today. Thank you very much for fellow panelists, speakers, etc. Wishing you all the best. Have a good rest of Remembrance weekend, and see you all. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks all.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.